Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Rabbi Bert Visotsky. I am the director of the Milstein Center for Interreligious Dialogue here at the Jewish Theological Seminary. I want to welcome you all for this wonderful event, and I especially want to welcome all of those people who are behind the camera, that is to say the live streamers who are watching this at home, too. I particularly want to thank Ruth Salzman and Angelica Berry, who are the two powers who run the, first the Russell Berry Foundation, but they also not only fund this event, but are very, very influential with our partner in this event. The John Paul II Annual Lecture in Interfaith Understanding is done in conjunction with the Pontifical University of St. Thomas Aquinas, where they have a John Paul II Center for Interfaith Understanding. I have had the incredible privilege of teaching there, and thanks to Angelica Berry, priests and leaders in the Catholic world come from all over the world. All roads indeed do lead to Rome. But once there, they have the opportunity to learn about Judaism from Jewish faculty from North America, from Israel, and I suspect Europe as well. And then Angelica is nice enough also to bring that cadre of leaders to Israel, to the Hartman Center in Jerusalem, where they do further study. This means that over the last 10 years, because it's their 10th anniversary, the center in Rome has seeded, that's S-E-E-D-E-D, has seeded incredible amounts of goodwill towards the Jewish community in the hierarchy of the church, but also in the parishes. And it's just an incredibly important and valuable program, and we here at JTS are just thrilled to be, as it were, a New York face of that program, and Angelica and Ruth have really graced us now 5-6 years to be able to host this lecture. I'm hoping that when you came in, you were able to get an index card and a pencil. If not, Cornelia, will you pass out, Cornelia? Those index cards and pencils are either for you to mark down your golf score, or during the conversation that's about to take place, we invite you to write down questions. As the conversation winds up in about 45 minutes, we will collect your questions. I'll sort through them. I'll give them to Stephanie, and she can tee them up for Sister Simone to reply. I want to also say, can I hold up the book? We have copies of Sister Simone's wonderful memoir, is it?
Something.
A manifesto, Nuns on the Bus. They will be for sale at discount. That's what we do. We sell books at discount. After the lecture, in the room to your left, where Sister Simone will be able to sign them for you as well. Sister Simone has not yet seen this. Some of you who come to these events know that I always invite the audience to join me in what has become a central interfaith activity at these kind of events. Please silence your cell phones. It is my pleasure to kick off this lecture by introducing my esteemed and beloved colleague, Rabbi Stephanie Ruskay. I can't say it more bluntly than this. We brought Stephanie back to JTS to make trouble. And her advent here, she is the Associate Dean of the Rabbinical School of the seminary, and she is the Associate Director of the Louis Finkelstein Institute, which I have the privilege of directing, which means we get to make trouble together. And the Louis Finkelstein Institute Social Justice Fellow is somewhere in the room? Way in the back there, Ruth Messenger. So for those of you that know, Ruth's reputation often precedes her.
Oh my gosh.
That the three of us just are really, really dedicated to making the seminary not just the great place of Torah it always has been, where we study Torah, but to fulfill that which is written, that we study in order to do. And we're getting our students out there. We're trying to raise up a generation who go out and make the world a better place. Stephanie, after she was ordained here, went to work in the Jewish alphabet soup of organizations. I think the last organization you were at was the American Jewish World Service? Oh, that was your first. Okay, Abodah, Joined for Justice, a well-accomplished troublemaker. And Stephanie is going to introduce the rabbi of troublemakers, Sister Simone.
Thank you. Good? Okay. So tonight is really going to be a conversation where you learn all about Sister Simone and all the ways she makes trouble in the world. The sort of one line about who she is a sister, she is a lawyer, she is the executive director of Network, she is an Auburn Senior Fellow, she is a mentor and an inspirer to many of us, and will be to all of you by the time we're done tonight. We're really going to use our time together to have a conversation, and you'll get to ask some questions too. But often in our society, we don't talk about money, religion, or politics, and luckily for all of us, that's like the essence of all of Sister Simone's work, so we're going to talk about it a lot tonight. So welcome aboard. I'm going to ask you to tell us a little bit. You were not given the name Simone when you were born. You chose this name, and it has a lot of meaning to you. So will you tell us, how did you become Sister Simone?
Well, I'm grateful you didn't ask about my baptismal name that I started with. It actually was Mary, and a very boring name. And when I joined my religious community, it was still the tradition that you could ask for a different name. And my favorite saint or patron is Simon Peter. And Simon Peter is the poor old fisherman doofus that Jesus picked to be the leader of the crowd. And the guy was totally enthusiastic. He would leap out of boats and not pay attention to the fact they were in the middle of the Sea of Galilee, but he'd leap out because he saw Jesus. He was going for it, and then he's like, oh, yeah. And he starts sinking. Well, I totally identified with his enthusiasm and the temptation to leap before you knew all the details. And so it seemed to me that Simon Peter was a perfect patron for me. So I asked for the name Simone. Many of my sisters in the community said, that's a French name. That's kind of, there's some Simones that are not, they're kind of movie star type. I don't know if you're going to get that name. But what I did was made a case for it based on my scriptural interpretation. And I'm sure it was quite persuasive, but at least I ended up with the name. So I've had the name now for, I don't know, the whole time I've been in the community, which has been a treasure, but I still am quite like Simon Peter. I have a tendency just to see something and go for it, and then think, oh my gosh, we got to work out the details. Help. Oh.
Thank you. So other cases that you've made, you made a case for your name, but I think you also made a case to be a lawyer. I don't know if more sisters become lawyers now, thanks to you, but it sounds like when you got the idea, it was not so common. So will you tell us why you did that and what you've been doing as a lawyer?
Right. Well, when I was a young sister, young sisters had a lot of energy. Young people have a lot of energy, more than I do now. But anyway, so I was working full-time at the Archdiocesan Religious Education Office in Portland, Oregon for Western Oregon. It was a fabulous job. But in my spare time, because I had a lot of energy, I was doing community organizing on the side, and we organized for tenants' rights legislation in Portland, Oregon, where the power of owning land is, because it's a farm state, it was really powerful. I didn't understand any of those dynamics at the time. I just knew that these people in Portland, in the really poorest part of town, needed some help because the landlords weren't taking care of their property. And we didn't have a leg to stand on. So we organized all this great testimony, and I've always been a storyteller, so we got stories ready, and we went down to Salem, Oregon to testify, and some curmudgeon of a legislator, after listening to these heartbreaking stories, said, well, what about the covenant of something or another? I don't know what it was. And it made me mad. and it was another leap. So I come home to my sisters and I say, I have to go to law school. I cannot stand this power imbalance. I have to go to law school. And they were a little surprised. But, oh, really? Well, Simone, none of us have ever done that. How's that going to work? So then I made a case for why I should go to law school to the leadership of my community. And after I made final vows in the community a couple of years later, then I went to law school, went to UC Davis, which is King Hall, named after Martin Luther King Jr. And I went there because their commitment to serving underserved populations and making sure that law is used for justice, not just to protect or to secure the blessings of liberty to the few, but rather to the many. So it's been a good thing. But the one thing that did happen, because I went to law school to do policy, but while I was in law school, I discovered I liked practicing law. So I did that for 18 years. It was great. I loved it.
And your approach to law, like what kind of practice did you have?
Oh, right. Well, so I started a low-cost legal service center to serve the working poor, folks who didn't qualify for legal aid but couldn't afford private counsel. And so the idea that I had was that it was the working poor who didn't have access to justice. And so I created this low-cost legal service center called the Community Law Center. And in the beginning, I used the royal we a lot. We were doing this and we were doing that because it was just me. And I couldn't get any funding because there was no track record for doing this kind of thing. And I would steal paper clips from the courthouse because we couldn't afford to buy paper clips. And we couldn't get funding to have an office, so my sisters that I lived with, they said, well, Simone, we've got this telephone closet, you could start there. And so that's what we did. And after a year, we had gotten, we actually became an actual we. A Sister of St. Joseph joined me as a paralegal. And then after doing this for 18 years, we ended up doing all the high conflict, low-income family law cases in Alameda County, in Oakland, California. And just 10 days ago, we had a reunion of the family court service, this whole community of family court workers, both the lawyers and judges and family court service people. And it was like a magical time. We were able to shape the practice of family law in this county in a way that was so good for families and really made huge differences in people's lives. And we just had a reunion. It was like, I hadn't seen him since I left, and so it was like magic. But we were like instant family again. It was wonderful.
I feel like you had that experience twice this week because you also were the alum, the alum of the year from your law school?
That's right, yeah. The day before the family law reunion, I got to be the alum of the year for my law school and had another reunion. It was perfect.
So it seems to me that your career has been kind of a combination of service and justice work, and that is sort of part of your how you live out your faith and leadership. So in the book, you talk about the Benedictine nuns said, if Jesus blesses those who wipe away the tears, when he also blessed those who work to prevent them from being shed. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit about how that plays out in your work.
Oh, interesting. Sure. Maybe back up a little bit to the basis of this work from any of the faith traditions, as I understand, or at least as I understand my own faith tradition, is that the work from justice comes out of a spiritual practice, and it is not an isolated cerebral activity, but rather it's at the root and heart of our faith. It's not applying, how can I say, a dissertation and then we'll have a checklist. Rather, it's about the effort to live in an integral fashion what really matters. And so what I've discovered is that it's the stories of ordinary people that matter the most. And what we as people of faith, and I think it applies to any faith, certainly in the Catholic tradition of Christian, it fits. And I'd be curious what you all, this is where giving a talk is hard, or even having a conversation, because I want to ask you all questions. So I'll restrain. Hopefully we'll have a chance to talk. But is that I've seen that the call of faith is to touch the pain of the world is real. And that touching the pain of the world is real is then letting your heart be broken open. And if your heart's broken open, then that's what releases hope into the darkness, is that it's all about knowing the anguish of our time and not ducking from it. But in our culture, the U.S. culture, if you just watch TV, the news for 20 minutes on regular television, they've got so many ads for ways to avoid pain. And so I think one of the big faith crises of our times is that we hide from pain. And if we're hiding from pain, then we're hiding from truth, and we're hiding from our connection with each other. So what I try to do is to what I call walking willing into conversation and into relationship and into letting my heart be touched by the pain of the world and be transformed by it. And that is a spiritual practice, to be faithful to it, to not dodge it. And it's hard sometimes but what I've found is the key for me to being able to keep doing it is to know that I'm not in charge. When it becomes too much, or I begin to worry about being burned out, burnout really is about exercising my control, thinking that I'm in charge, that I'll make a difference. You just broke my heart, so I'm going to fix it for you. No. That's where that kind of control is way beyond. I can enter into a relationship with you and maybe we can do something about it, but I'll carry you with me. And that's all I have to do. And so faith is about walking, for me, is about walking together towards each other, letting our hearts be broken open, being in relationship, and then living in the ambiguity that I can't fix it. It's really hard, but it's a spiritual practice. Does that make some sense? Some people are nodding. Praise God. Thank you. Thank you for encouraging me. Because sometimes when I talk about this, I have no idea what people think. Oh man, is she nuts? Entertaining, but nuts.
Please talk a little bit about your contemplative practice. Like how do you do it? What do you do and how do you do it? And I will say, I've been feeling extremely calm since I've been reading about it and hearing you talk about it. So it's sort of an invitation to invite everyone else in to the way that you use a Zen practice on a regular basis.
Right. Well, okay. My spiritual practice is every morning I sit for about it's 50 minutes, 2 25-minute blocks. And there's two ways. Usually I do it sitting on a cushion and your back straight, hands in a position, and your thumbs become the telltale sign. If some of you do this, here, I'll give you the secret, is that this morning, my thumbs were pressing against each other because I was wrestling it. I was just totally distracted. I was all involved in this fight that we were having about paycheck fairness and rah, 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 rah. So I was very distracted. So my thumbs were all like this because it was tension. Ideally, if I am just being and being open, then they sit just barely touching. Or the other thing is when my mind is wandering every place, it'll be like this. So they're the sort of the telltale sign. So on the good days, on the days that I would say I did it the way I aspire to do it, it's just barely touching. And it's just breathing. And I have a little mantra that I use, and it changes depending upon what's happening. My current one is Flame Up. It's from Gerard Manley Hopkins. Flame up like shining from shook foil. So breathe in, flame up, and breathe out like shining from shook foil. And that is, here's one of the big challenges, though, is to sit without moving for 25 minutes. And it's the discipline of not moving that I have found calms my spirit and my jumpy mind eventually. And sometimes I sort of feel like my arms are going to be a helicopter and spin around the room, you know. But the discipline of not doing it is what pulls to the center of being open to the deeper truth. Does that make some sense? A little bit.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
And now everyone's going to sit here and check out their thumbs.
Yeah,
while we
right.
talk,
Watch
yes.
your thumbs. It's really challenging.
So I don't know everybody who's, sitting with us tonight or watching live streaming, but I have the feeling that it might be true that you're the only person in the room and on live stream who has been censured by the Vatican. So I wondered if you wanted to tell us about how that
see
came
my
to
scars?
be. Yeah, what'd you learn from it, and why were they censoring you?
Oh, glory. Well, they're sore losers, actually, is the reason. Okay, in 2012, we did get named in the censure of the Leadership Conference of Women Religious, which is the organization of the heads of Catholic sisters in the United States. But we got named, I know. Well, we got named, and they said that we were a bad influence on Catholic sisters. You have to know we were founded by Catholic sisters in 1971 to work on the issues, our organization was, network, to work on the issues of poverty. And the Vatican said we were a bad influence because we promoted radical feminist themes incompatible with the gospel. And we worked too much on the issue of poverty and not enough on gay marriage and abortion. Well, since our mission was to work on issues of poverty, I sort of thought it was a badge of honor. They noticed, how nice. But it was also extremely painful. But the real thing behind it was the 2010 healthcare debate. And that's really why we got named. And because in 2010, our organization network had worked on healthcare reform from the day we were founded. And so it was 38 years at that point. And it was all complicated politics. But in the end, the only way the healthcare bill was going to get passed was if the House passed the Senate bill. And it was all because of Massachusetts and blah, blah. You don't need to know all the politics. But what happened was the Catholic Health Association came out in favor of the Affordable Care Act. And I said, oh, we've got to support them. This was on a Friday night or Saturday morning. We've got to support the CHA. So I'll do a sign-on letter, and we'll support them with the sign-on letter. It's a great idea, Simone. Lovely, lovely, lovely. So I get, on the computer, and I send it out to all my friends. And I said we had to have it back by Tuesday, close of business, because we didn't know right when the vote was going to come. And on Monday, I was in California for meetings, and Monday I get a call from one of my contacts at the White House who was Catholic, and I said, oh, hi, Mark, how are you? He says, I'm not a Catholic anymore. I go, what happened, Mark? I think I'm a Buddhist. Well, that's good, but, I like Buddhism. I do Zen, it's cool. What's up? He said, the bishops had come out opposing the Affordable Care Act. And later I learned it was because their very conservative staff were highly identified with the far right in Congress, did not want to give the President Obama a win, and for that reason had told the bishops, and in error, that there was federal funding for abortion in the Affordable Care Act. My astute political analysis, having read the whole thing, 1,600 pages, was liar, liar, pants on fire. But that didn't win the day for them. But so they were really driven by politics. My letter, the letter I wrote, got signed by 58 heads of Catholic sisters communities, many of whom had hospitals and knew what they were talking about. So they came out in favor of it, and I know of 29 votes that we got in the House of Representatives because of that letter. And so we we won. And but then the bishops started retaliating against sisters who signed the letter, and so they said things like, "Well, you can't use." Some of the sisters in Nebraska, you can't use the parish for your social justice meetings anymore. Oh, okay. Then they said to sisters in Pennsylvania, you can't advertise your vocation day in our diocesan newspaper, and a few other things like that. And then I couldn't speak on church property in a lot of places, which is still sort of true some places. And so, but as one of the sisters said that, oh, Simone, don't worry about all this. And what happened was the boys played the girls, and for once the girls won, and the boys are pissed. So the censure really came about because they were still pissed, said she in a very socially appropriate fashion. But the hardest part about all that was they based their position on a lie. And that's the part that broke my heart. But here's the thing. So the censure, which was horribly painful, awful, ended up pushing our little organization network out into the world in a way that would have never happened. We ended up with the bus, which is like the most glorious, amazing experience, but it's all because of prayer and trying to be open to how do we use this moment of notoriety for mission, and staying faithful to mission as opposed to the pain that it caused. It was tempting to fight back, to push back. You know how we always push back, and Lord knows I like a fight. So pushing back would have been really nice, but it would not have been faithful. It wouldn't have been productive. And it's all about being faithful, for me, to the mission that we're called to, care for those who are most in need. And so out of that faithfulness came the bus. An explosion of the Spirit in my book, and where it's an experience of joy and welcome, and all are welcomed in the bus. And it is one of the deep gifts of my life that we were able to do it. But it's that transformation of pain to not take it personally, but take it to mission, that then gets transformed into the bigger story, into a surprise. That's why I say, well, join the convent, lead a quiet life. It's wonderful.
Thank you. So will you tell us about the bus? Because in some ways it's like a moving ritual that, brings in everybody who is in its way. It goes to people. You have a series of things. It sounded like you kind of had a plan when you started, and you kept making it up and refining it, and you developed rituals. But what did it look like? Who went on it? Where did you stop? What did you do in every place?
Oh my gosh. So we have 7 or 8 hours. I could tell you all the details, but a summary of it. On that first trip, we had no idea. We did not know what we were doing. Luckily, other people had ideas of what we should do. And so I thought we were going to have a yellow school bus, and we would have about 40 sisters on the bus. And it turns out, no, that's not it. The interior of the bus is like a campaign bus or a rock band bus. It just depends. And the first one was a rock band bus because it was campaign season and it was the only dregs in the yard left, and we got it at the last minute because we had the idea on May 14th and we were on the road that first time on June 17th, so there was not a lot of time. And when we left, it was a 2-week trip. We only had 1 week planned when we left DC, and back at the office they were scrambling to plan it out. But as it's evolved, I won't give you all the excruciating details, but I'll just say one little story about the first day. I didn't know anything. And so we were going to start in Steve King's, lobbying Steve King. So he's gotten recent familiarity, notoriety in the national press. He is despicable, said she in a polite fashion. And what we wanted to, he was in support of this horrible budget and wanted to make it worse. And so I said, if we were starting in Iowa, we were going to start with Steve King. So we had to go to Ames, Iowa. I didn't know Ames didn't have an airport. Who knew? And so somebody calls up from Des Moines and says, well, when you're coming to the bus, our owner of our hotel wants to give you a free night. Oh, that's nice. I didn't think I had to go to Des Moines, but I did. We did. And so all this stuff happens. But there was so much press attention at that time that when we drove from Des Moines to Ames, it's about an hour. We had to stop halfway because so many press wanted to ride the bus. We had to swap people off the bus. It was just crazy. Anyway, it evolved into this. So we do 4 things every day. And we've also learned that we're the most hyperactive bus trip that ever has existed. It's because I'm Sister Mary Penny Pitcher. I'm going to get my money's worth while we're paying all this money. So I want to make sure that we're busy all the time. It gets a little exhausting, but it's really good. It's cost effective this way. And so we do 4 things. We do a site visit. So we go someplace to see, meet people in a situation being impacted, whatever our theme is. This last time it was on tax policy and that horrible, awful tax bill passed by the Republicans, you could say Congress, but no, it was just Republican votes. They wanted no Democratic amendments. They didn't even let the Democrats read the whole bill. This was totally partisan politics that passed that. So anyway, we were out on tax policy. And why did you vote to hurt your people was our question. So we would go to places that were going to be cut because of the tax bill and hear their stories. Then we would do press, but we usually did press after we did a lobby visit with somebody who had voted for the tax bill and against health care, where we would take constituents in and meet with staff and say, why did either you or your boss vote to hurt your people? Could you explain that to us, please? And then I would go out to tell the press. We'd do a press conference afterwards, and I'd go out and tell the press what we heard. Well, the best one was in Beaver, Pennsylvania, Congressman Rothfuss. He had never met with his constituents, and his constituents go in with us to this lobby visit with their chief of staff. And they're saying, why won't he meet with us? And I've asked my question, why did he vote to hurt his people? And this chief of staff says, well, Congressman Rothfuss, he's really shy. He's an introvert, and he's painfully shy. Well, the constituents were great. They just responded like this. They said, well, he meets with his donors. And the chief of staff says, but he knows them. It was like, whoa. Anyway, so I got to report that to the press. I loved it. So we do a site visit, lobby visit, press, and then in the evening we do what we call a town hall, like this, where we can tell stories, get together, and talk about what matters. How are we going to deal with this? How can we be community together and support the future? Because one of the big problems that we're facing that I've realized in our nation is not only do we fear pain, we fear community. It is our hyper-individualism that is tearing us apart. And democracy cannot survive with hyper-individualism because democracy depends on community, depends on an educated populace that cares for each other, depends on this commitment to a common good that's bigger than my own individual story. So with the bus, we try to create that community where it's safe and all are welcome. So in 25 words or less, and I could talk forever about it. So is that okay? Is that good?
Thank you, yes.
All
And
right,
what
okay.
was the theme of that first bus tour?
Oh, the first bus tour, that was the best, because it was, well, no, it's not. I love them all. I'll tell you. The first one was against Paul Ryan's budget. So it was reasonable revenue for responsible programs. That was our mantra. We needed reasonable revenue for responsible programs. And it was all about these programs that Paul Ryan wanted to cut. The second one was about immigration reform and getting it out of the Senate. And we did a big loop to all these Republican states to get the senators to vote for it. We succeeded in that, but we could not get John Boehner to get it, to bring it to the House floor. So we lost that. That was in 13. In 14, it was We the People, We the Voters, trying to do voter turnout. Oh, we wandered Iowa like it would never. I mean, who knew Iowa had so many roads? But we were over in a lot of places. But that was, and then we did in 15 was Pope Francis was coming, so I sort of felt like Paula Revere. Pope Francis is coming. Pope Francis is coming, and we went to states that would not ordinarily that weren't very Catholic and didn't know about Pope Francis. So it was bridge the divides, transform politics. And one of the things with that one is then when Pope Francis addressed Congress, he said. And I later learned that he knew about our bus trip. He said that so the theme was bridge the divides. He said, I am a bridge, and you are all called to be bridges. And it was like, I just got tears in my eyes. Whoa. Anyway, so that was 15. 16 was, oh gosh, what was the title of it? We went to the Democratic and the Republican convention, and it was all about trying to work for the common good, deal with issues of poverty. And then this last one was, the first one was We the People, reasonable revenue for responsible programs, and it was on responsible programs. This last one was on reasonable revenue, and the fact that we the people need to pay for what we need in our society, and we are to be responsible for the future. We can't put this all on a credit card and expect our children and grandchildren to pay for it, so that we need to pay for what we need and need to raise reasonable revenue, which is not what the Republicans voted for in 2017. And some of you may have discovered that as you went to file your taxes, and they put the SALT tax, this is when you know I'm from DC, the state and local tax limitation. It's a really, 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 really serious problem. And even staff in our little office, and we don't pay big salaries, but they're having an adverse impact because of this. If you have a home mortgage or anything like that, where you're paying state property taxes. So I mean, it's just wrong. But it was the Republicans doing it to punish blue states. It was strategically done. It was their agenda to make blue states suffer. How is that democracy? How is that the common good? How is that caring for anybody? And then running us into a debt that is shocking and horrifying. Outside of that, it's perfect.
Thank you. So you're wearing a pin that has "The bush was not consumed," which is that's what's on the outside of our building, and it is our sort of logo. And yours has our logo and says "Rise Up." But you talked about the burning bush as sort of a way that you entered one of those bus tours. So will you tell us what that meant to you?
Holy moly, yes. Welcome back to the story of the contemplative life and Simone's odd experiences. So I do Zen, and so it's this meditation practice in a Christian style. Actually, Zen is just in any style. And in December of 2011, I was on my annual 8-day retreat, and the retreat director who I'd sat with a long time pushed me. It's really annoying to be pushed on retreat. Did you ever notice? I mean, they call it spiritual direction, but I vastly prefer spiritual drift. It's really nice, a lot easier. But anyway, he pushed me, and I was dealing with radical acceptance. Oh, no, I was dealing first with acceptance, and he made it radical. I think he had to do radical acceptance. Oh, my God. Then I discovered, as I'm pondering, sitting looking at a wall for untold hours, that radical acceptance is, we got trouble. Radical acceptance is acknowledging that I had a mistake of God list in my head. People who were created by the divine on an off day. Folks who really shouldn't be repeated. Did you ever notice Mitch McConnell doesn't have lips? It's really a mistake. But what I realized was I needed to accept even Mitch McConnell and everybody else on my mistake of God list. And finally, I got to this holy place of being able to hold them with compassion. I was kind of pleased. That was probably a bad sign. But so I go to Pat, and I'm talking with him about, I got to this place, and I had 4 more days left to retreat, and I can be holy. And he says, well, now add in fighting. Fighting? I just got to this place of accepting. What do you mean fighting? I'm sputtering. Well, what happens in the Zen tradition is when the teacher, Pat, thinks you've said enough, he rings a bell and you're supposed to get up and leave. Well, I was still sputtering. So he rings the bell and I have to go back and sit on my cushion and sputter at the wall for a while. What I finally came to understand is that the challenge of the spiritual life is not fighting against, pushing back, the way we do this. Rather, what we're called to is to fight for a vision. And in fighting for a vision, you still can radically accept everyone. Because I too often was fighting Mitch McConnell and everybody else on my list. And so to fight for this vision. But then what happened when you put radical acceptance together with fighting for a vision? It's fire. It's fire. And at least that's my experience, it's fire. And this insight happened a few months before the Vatican censure, but then when the Vatican censure happened and my prayer was to radically accept even them, that in my prayer I knew that the fire was, that we were all called to be a burning bush, to let God flame up in our lives. And as long as God, the divine, flames up in our lives, we will not be destroyed. And that's the promise, that's the gift, that's the story, that's the knowledge, that is the essence of all of our faith in our Abrahamic traditions. And so for me, that's why the bus is it's fire. It won't be destroyed as long as we're faithful.
You talk about how, as a group, the sisters would all come together to pray every day on the trip, and maybe one day you didn't.
Yes.
What happened that day?
That wasn't very much about radical acceptance. Yes, we meet every morning to pray for at least a half hour. On the first bus trip, we were really tired. We didn't know what we were doing, and it was exhausting, so we thought we'd sleep in and then pray on the bus. And then we forgot, and we got busy, and life happened. By lunch, we were like gnawing on each other. It was like, never again did we miss prayer. Because it's the only way to create a community that can sustain the intensity of a bus trip. And because we have to be radically open to everybody we meet, we have to totally trust each other and each other's instincts. We have to be in harmony in the process as much as we can, and we can't be jealous of each other. And for me, the only way to do that is to be connected in prayer. So our prayer on the bus is usually in the morning before we get on the bus, and is like 15, 20 minutes of silence, where everybody does their sort of silent contemplative practice, however it is. And then about 10 to 15 minutes of shared prayer, either sharing scripture or sharing a reflection that's somebody was touched by, or a worry. One of the worries when we went to the Republican convention was, I'll never forget this, Margaret said at the end of prayer, she said, well, I'm really worried about going to the Republican convention. This is in 2016, and there was all this worry about violence and all this. And she says, what'll we do if there's an active shooter? I'm a little too old to run. Well, what happened was, as a result of that, we had a briefing from Homeland Security about what to do with an active shooter. Just in case you're ever in this situation, the first thing is to run. The second thing is to hide behind something, but not like a closet or something where you're going to get trapped in someplace. What you learn at a talk at GTS. What could I say? All of a sudden I realized what a weird thing to be talking about. But anyway, the third thing is and this was most, if you can't run, you can't hide, you should attack the shooter. I don't know that I have the guts to do that. But there's stories from New Zealand about folks who did, who made a difference. There's stories of Parkland that happened to. So anyway, but that came out of prayer.
Well, thank you. So we had threatened to do this, but I think we should. Should we give them a chance to feel what your buzz questions are like? What happens when you pull up in town and you meet with the people? How do you get them started?
Right. So this got started because in 2014, Vice President Biden came to the launch of our bus. We were back in Des Moines, and those kind of high-level politicians are really unpredictable about when they're actually going to get there, because they're always getting phone calls that are important when they're running the country. And so we had to have kind of an elastic program. But then it turned out to be such a great part of the program, we added it in. So we get to practice. So what I would like to invite you to do is to turn to somebody that you're around and just 2 seconds, answer the question, who in your family is it difficult to talk to about politics and why? Who in your family is it difficult to talk to about politics and why? It's my brother, but he defended me on Facebook a couple of months ago, so I can't talk about him anymore. It was so sweet. Well, it's just free reign, and it's all individualism. That's the truth. So this is okay? Yeah. Okay, 2 seconds, finish up. Make sure both of you share. Are there a couple of people that would share their story just so we get a sense of the whole? Anybody willing to do it? Yeah. Just who'd you pick?
You're going to need to come up to one of the
sorry,
microphones.
I'm making life difficult.
So the people who are live streaming can hear your story. And while we're at it, please, if you have questions, pass them to the outer aisle so that Cornelia and I can collect them.
I didn't know I'd be honored.
This is cool.
Get up here, but the one story that sticks out is
My
brother-in-law Dennis, who is active in politics. And one day we were at the Jersey Shore, and we all had a couple of beers, and we were relaxing. And he really does believe that he's on CNN, and people started, being silly. And he gets up, and he doesn't get that this whole thing is a ride on the bus. And no matter what position that we're taking, it's a position, and we're just riding on the bus. And he gets up, and he just leaves the Jersey Shore for a week and never comes back because it was that important. And to this day, I still don't remember what he was talking about.
Wow.
Thank you.
But isn't that the truth? Is that when you get identified with a position that doesn't feel respected? Yes. Bless me. In my tradition, it's bless me, brothers and sisters, for I have sinned. Yes. Ooh. Anybody else? The thing we like about that question is usually everybody laughs, because there's always somebody in your family. And we asked that at the Republican convention when we were doing lemonade ministry work, at pulling red wagons with big Kool-Aid containers of lemonade, handing out cold glasses, and then asking people if they would answer our questions. Well, the first question was, who in your family is difficult to talk to about politics? The second question was, what worries you in this election cycle? And what surprised me in both the Democratic and Republican convention was that both sides said, ooh, we don't have a lot of people said, we don't have a good choice for president. And this one guy at the Republican convention, who was the mayor of a small town in the Midwest, older guy, he got tears in his eyes. And I said, well, what are you going to do? And he said, I'm a lifelong Republican. I'll do what I must. And then the third question was, what gives you hope for our nation? Because I thought we ought to end on some upbeat thing. Well, the thing that was shocking was at the Republican convention, at least a third of the respondents, now granted it wasn't scientific and all this stuff, but at least a third of the respondents had a difficult time articulating a hope. They go, hope, hope, and this one guy says to me, the Constitution? As if there were a right answer, and I was going to say, yeah, that's right, the Constitution. But there was this one woman at the Republican convention that still blows my mind. Big hair, Texas, red sequined vest, high heels, really quite decked out, in line to go through security. And what gives you hope for our nation? What gives me hope for our nation is that Donald Trump is going to be elected president and restore the masculinity of men in our nation who have been kneecapped by the feminist movement. Now, I am very good at responses. I had none. Kneecapped by feminist movement. Thank you very much. Would you like more lemonade? But at least we heard her story. I'll never forget it.
Does anyone else want to share who in your family you were thinking of? Okay, I hear you. Yes, they might be watching.
Ooh.
Okay, so Sister Simone, you have a philosophy about treasuring, not grasping. So I hope you'll explain it. But this is a time of lots of anxiety in the world, for our country, for organized religion, for institutions. So what, from your approach, might help some of us who are thinking anxiously about the present and the future?
Well, I was just on the train coming up here thinking I don't have a clue. But this is really hard times. But my spiritual practice lets me know that the two things that shut down the contemplative life are fear or holding on. And fear is rampant in our country right now, and that seals us off from each other, seals us off from community, seals us off from any potential for really making change. And holding on is this grasping is the other piece, and it's because if I'm holding on to something, then I don't have room to receive the more. And the challenge is and that's why for contemplative practice, you keep your hands open. And the hard thing right now is it feels like that it's all sand running through fingers because there's not a there. And what I've come to realize is that to be open-handed means that then I have the capacity to embrace, to hug, to be in relationship, to put my arm through somebody else's arm, because you don't do that and keep your fists clenched. But here's the other part that's hard about this grasping thing. I used to think it was only in fear that I held on. Then I discovered is that I also hold on to some good things. My favorite, I've done a ton of media stuff, interviews. My favorite interview ever was with Stephen Colbert, and I could just hold on to that forever. But I'm called to let it go. Because if I hold on to it, then I'm not ready for the next. See how that works? And so the spiritual challenge is to be in relationship with others, in community, because we cannot do this time alone. The forces of chaos are really strong. And what some political folks are counting on is that we'll be individualistic and isolated and then controlled. And we can't afford that. We cannot afford that. If this democracy is to be saved, if our nation is to be healed, it's got to be together. So keep your hands open. If you're afraid, reach out and embrace somebody else. It's the only way to deal with fear. Don't cower. Leap out of a boat. Follow my patron. Be Peter.
So you talked about politics some tonight, and it might have sounded partisan, but it was not partisan. But you talk about the 100% a lot, which then is everybody. So what does it mean, the 100% to you, and how do you think about it as our way forward?
Well, we do say we're for the 100%. Not the 100% might not recognize it. The reason why we say that is that we did a study of the challenges in our nation and read a book called Spirit Level, and it was published, I think, in 2010. We read it in 2010. And it's British researchers who researched developed nations and found the quality of life based on 16 measures from the UN. And what they found was the greater the income and wealth disparity, the lower the quality of life for everyone, not just those at the bottom. And the US is a huge outlier. We have the worst income and wealth disparity in the world, except for Singapore. I don't know what's going on in Singapore, but it ain't good. So, but the quality of life is also on all 16 measures, when you put them all together, it's the worst in the world. So we said at Network, if we want to, okay, first you have to know, so our study year, we called Mind the Gap. We thought it was funny to have the name of a campaign that you had to have been to London to get the joke. You had to be wealthy enough to go to London, to be in the underground to hear, Mind the Gap. And so we thought that was amusing. And then, so we couldn't just mind the gap. Then we said we had to mend the gap. That in order to make our nation better for the 100%, we need to heal this income and wealth disparity and to bring it closer together. And that this mending the gap then becomes, we're for the 100%. Everybody will be better off. Everybody will be better off on things like obesity, infant and maternal mortality, education, mental health, drug and alcohol addiction. I mean, the list goes on, imprisonment. But it would cost, but the price we have to pay is to come closer together, not further apart. So that's why we say we're for the 100%. We want everybody to do better in the quality of life. The measure of winning is not money. The measure of winning is how are we together. So that's what we try to be about. Some days we're better at it than others.
Thank you. So at the end of the book, in the last couple of pages, you presented an idea I hadn't heard anyone say before, and you wrote the book a couple of years ago, so maybe you've thought about it some more. But you talked about the idea of civil obligations as a balance to civil rights, and you said we need our civil rights so we can balance our civil obligations. So I'm curious what you've done with that idea since. And
yeah, that is a good question. What did I do with it? Here's the idea: is that I think one of the reasons why we journeyed so far into individualism is that we got so necessarily engaged in civil rights, but we saw civil rights as a one-off, a one-on-one. My capacity to Well, in the racial context, my capacity to not be discriminated against, if I was a person of color, if I was African American, and that I should be served, or that everybody should have a right to vote. As a lawyer going to law school in the 70s, we studied a lot of these cases, but it was always with one client, or you tried a class action and the class action would get thrown out, so you had to do it with an individual. And so we focused on rights, but there's a balance with rights. So you have a right to vote. Well, I think we've got to emphasize the obligation to show up and vote. That we have, thanks, Ruth. We have an obligation to be engaged in democracy. We have an obligation to each other. And that the rights balanced with obligations then could be a way to weave us back together. But it's the idea that only the rights, it pulls us apart. But obligations brings us back together. It's breathing in and breathing out. That's what it takes. Does that make some sense? I mean, I actually don't know anybody else that talks about it, but you heard it here first.
Thank you. Okay, so we have a few questions
Okay.
that have come in, and you're welcome to send more forward. We had one, it might have been from Bert, who wants to know how we met, because I brought a prop. So Sister Simone and I met in El Paso in June. We both went with the American Federation of Teachers, and it was as part of a faith delegation and Harold was with us, our
Yes.
trusty photographer and colleague and friend. And we were all there as a group of multi-faith religious leaders to bear witness and bring attention to the issue of children separated from their families on the border. And some of those people have still gone back to go visit. I understand now from reading all about you that you've been doing lots of work on the border before that trip, but I felt really lucky to be there with you.
Absolutely, it was really a powerful place to be, and I remember standing outside the courthouse in downtown El Paso, knowing that cases were being litigated inside, and that the law was being used to divide families. A law that I've worked all my life to use for healing was being used for division. And I just had to walk away at one point and just kind of weep. And I wasn't supposed to talk until we got out to Tornillo, because we all had our little assigned places. Then all of a sudden I hear Randy Weingarten, who's the head of AFT, wanted me to speak at that moment. Well, here I have tears streaming down my cheeks. And so it was a fairly powerful moment to be able to weep publicly about what our nation was doing. And while I felt kind of embarrassed that I was weeping, I later realized that was the most appropriate reaction of all. Way better than, just my cerebral thoughts. And then I began saying, well, maybe what we need in this time is some public weeping, standing places together and weeping, just weep. It's beyond the articulated legal arguments. Just weep.
Your heart broken open, right?
Heart broken open.
So we have a couple of people who seem to be wondering about next bus tours, and they have some ideas for you
Oh,
and us.
cool. I'm always open.
Someone wants to know if it's healthcare again. And then someone else wants to know, are we going to do a bus trip on climate justice and the Green New Deal?
Oh, what a great idea. Well, we just did a site visit with the Auburn Seminary retreat with senior fellows. I have to acknowledge senior fellows, Catherine. We did a site visit to an island that we're losing. And that was really powerful to hear the story, and then to hear how much of it is already gone. It's only 5 feet high 5 feet above sea level now. And in another 15 years, 20 years, it's going to be gone. And here's the trouble. We can't do everything. Network's a little teeny. So I don't know. We're trying to weave the environmental issues into all of our issues, like with housing. Housing is probably the biggest one where we're doing environmental work to make sure that, I mean, housing is, well, you all know this in New York and the area. Housing's a crisis. It's a crisis all over the country. All over the country, in rural America as well as in the small villages and towns and cities. Housing is the most unreformed policy that we have, and part of it is that we seriously need to create sustainable development. And so the way we work on environment stuff is trying to do the sustainability going forward. Now, here's the trouble with the Green New Deal. It's a great headline. Doesn't have much detail, but it's a good motivating piece. And it motivated Mitch McConnell to be scum of the earth. And even though I radically accept him, I say that in a nonviolent way, trying to be ever faithful. But he brought it up just to tweak him, just to make fun. That was total shaming. And the fact is that we need new energy, we need new commitment. But I think where it's really happening, is going to happen, is first at smaller levels, local levels. We were in Detroit on the last bus trip at Reverend Faith Fowler is creating housing for the chronically homeless. And she bought, this will kill you from the New York City perspective, for $15,000 she bought 3 square blocks of Detroit, and is putting a tiny house on each lot. And if the people, and then they're designed, they're beautiful, they have marble countertops, it's just airy, beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. And if the person pays $1 a square foot per month, pays a small water bill because they're all on the solar grid, and then works with a financial planner and contributes 8 hours a month to building up the community. If they do that for 7 years, they own the property outright. And the whole idea is to build wealth and stability in a community. I mean, it was so exciting, so fabulous, but it's that kind of work where because our issue is economic poverty, so it's working to integrate into it long-term sustainability. But check her out. That Detroit was fabulous.
So what's your response to the label of socialist by Republicans and Fox News to people in opposition struggling for reform?
Laugh. Just laugh. I mean, they're meaning it as a joke. I mean, they want to shame us into doing this. They're trying to spread fear. And the biggest antidote to fear is laughter. I mean, don't be afraid to laugh. That's what I do. I mean, I just laugh. Oh, give me a break. That's ridiculous. Do you really know what socialism is? Have you checked the definition? Hey, I'm talking about the Constitution. I'm talking about we the people of the United States. We're forming a more perfect union. Don't you want to join it? Hey, just laugh. We're entirely too serious about the idiot stuff that they're saying. We can love them, we can radically accept them, but we don't have to believe them.
Okay, we have another one. What do you think is the future of American religious life, as so few are signing on and many want to remain traditional? They don't want their traditions to change.
Oh, isn't that the challenge? Praise God, I'm not God. I have no idea what the future is. All I know is that I'm called to be faithful, and I'm called to be a troublemaker, and it gives me a fair amount of joy. And I find that Pope Francis, I'll put this in. Pope Francis has these characteristics of holiness in the 21st century. And I never think about being holy, but after reading this, I sort of thought, oh, maybe I will. But he said, let's see if I can do all 5 of them. He says that perseverance is the first one. So we got to stay faithful. We have to stay at it. We have to persevere. And he says that meekness is a piece of it, but what that means is that we're willing to learn from each other. I'm not the know-it-all. To be holy, I can't be the know-it-all. Okay, so I'm willing to learn. The second is to have joy and a sense of humor. Isn't that cool? I love it. The third is to have passion and boldness. The fourth is to live in community, in relationship. How perfect. And the last one is to live in constant prayer. So all that means is kind of breathing. And my breath often is, help, help, help. That's all it is. But if we do that, then who cares what are the forms? Who cares who comes and goes? Religious life is the gift, I believe, is the gift of the Spirit to the people of the God. And if the people of God don't need this gift, well, then it's not going to be given. You got something else going on. But as a person of faith, how could I lament? But then there's these surprising things happening about religious life, at least in my odd community. Okay, you can gather we're a little odd. So, but right now we've got two novices and 5 candidates, and we're all of us old people are going, what? How'd that happen? Then we have to be responsible to them. You have to tame your roses. It's very, if you know The Little Prince, it's a real responsibility. Holy moly. We're too young too old to have puppies. I don't know.
Well, I'm thinking when we were talking in preparation for this, I sort of asked you, like, who do you think is going to come after you, in terms of, like, are people signing on? And you said, I can just do what I can do. If everyone just did their one little part, it would be okay. And you talked about people who think about the whole social justice agenda and think they have to do everything. Why don't you talk about that? Because people worry about it.
Oh my God, that really, yes. Okay. In the Christian tradition, we have this great image in some of Paul's letters about being one body. We're one body, and we all have a different part to play. So not everybody can be an ear, not everybody can be an eye, not everybody can be a hand or a foot. And half the trouble we get into is that somebody's out being their actual part. And it's not my part, and so I don't like your part. But I prayed about what my part in this body was at this point, and I realized that my part in the body is to be stomach acid in the body of Christ. My part is to go around and help metabolize food, break things up, release energy, do all this kind of stuff. And I'm not a hand or foot. I need people to take the energy released and do something with it. I can be toxic in large quantities, and I do need to be contained in a small bus. But it's my part. And so I'll do my part, but I need you to do yours. And then we can be this one body, this whole community that will make a wholeness. And it's in the wholeness that it all gets done. I'm not in charge of it all. And if I take too many hats, if I'm the chair of this and the chair of that and the chair of this and the chair of that, if I take too many hats, well, I'm taking somebody's job. And maybe I should wait for somebody else to step up. Or maybe it doesn't need to be done. And then the question for me always is, do I feel like I'm the one in control? Am I the one in charge? That's always a bad sign. Because if I'm the one in charge, then what happened to my faith? So we all need to do our piece, and it all gets done. And I just have to be faithful to mine. So as long as I riled you up and kind of did a little stomach acid work, perfect.
So we're sitting at JTS, and this is a multi-faith audience, but we are at JTS.
Right.
So what could you imagine the Jewish community could do to be helpful in your, action for the 100%? What's our role?
Ooh. Okay, I'll make suggestions, but that really needs to be answered by you. Because
Good
I'm
deflection.
But I'll make suggestions because this is time for my commercial announcement. You can be part of Network, our beloved organization. We were founded by Catholic sisters, but the way we describe ourselves is rooted in Catholic social teaching, the best of the Catholic Church, rooted in Catholic social teaching, open to all who share our passion. So you're all welcome to be a part of us. It's cool. It's fabulous. And if you want to do something specific, we have little handouts. You may have picked them up outside, but we've got 2 bills that are coming up that are really, 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 really important. One is on support Raise the Wage Act, and the other is the Dream Promise Act. And Dream Promise is the one about dreamers, as well as the LPS, the what? TP. Yes. Thank you for the initials. It's temporary protected status, as well as for folks who are here because they can't return to their country of origin because of either unrest or natural disasters, variety of reasons. And this administration has been horrible. Probably surprised to hear that, but horrible on for those. One of the challenges is there's no way we can get a comprehensive bill through, but that may be possible to get this on both Dreamers and TPS status, because there is a bipartisan bill submitted by Durbin and Graham in the Senate on Dreamers, and we expect a bipartisan bill tomorrow in the Senate. So they're separated in the Senate, but if we can get them, we can get it out of the House. Hopefully we can get the Senate to act on it. But anyway, but calls would make a difference. Pick it up, do it.
And you said you're doing a whole Lenten call to action.
Oh yeah. Our Lenten project. You don't have to be Catholic to do Lent. Jewish people would be welcome to our Lenten project. Just think of it as 6 weeks of work. What we're doing is a anti-racism work, and we've been reading White Fragility at the office. And before that, we developed we call it RWIG, Racial Wealth and Income Gap. We've studied it to figure out what's going on. And there are 12, we have 12 pieces of legislation passed by Congress that have created the racial wealth and income gap. And so far we've got 3 of the weeks up, or 4 weeks up. And you can do it, networklobby.org/Lent, takes you right to it, and you can see it. It's very educational, it's very readable, and I urge you to engage it. The original sin of the founding of our nation is slavery, and our attitude towards people of color. And we've got to repent, we've got to change. But it's most of us in white skin that have to make the change. And one of the problems about calling it racism is that we white people think of people of color. But the issue is ours, and is our continued action. And so we're trying to stir up and change hearts on this issue, and give people both information as well as a prayer base to break it open. This week, another Auburn Senior Fellow, Otis Moss, I love Otis, he's a pastor of UCC Trinity in Chicago. He wrote the prayer for in the reflection on this week's engagement. So check it out, it's cool. I'm prejudiced, but it's cool.
We're nearing the end of our time, though we're not there yet, but I feel like I should ask you, which is a question my grandmother always asked. Is there anything I didn't ask that I should have asked you?
Well, I do have 2 poems that I want to share.
Well, then, I'm glad I asked.
Is that? Oh, okay, cool. Okay, one's mine, and one is Scott Cairns. Scott is a poet, lived in Missouri last I heard. I don't know if he's still there. But the reason I thought of this one is because he calls it midrash. And I thought, ooh, this would be appropriate to share here. And it's a reflection on, remember the story of Lot's wife? And how, she wasn't faithful. She turned around. They had to flee Sodom and Gomorrah. And she had to run away, and she turns around, she turns into a pillar of salt. And anyway, he's got this poetic reflection on the turning of Lot's wife, and then I'll end with one with a Christian scriptures piece. Okay, so this is The Turning of Lot's Wife by Scott Cairns. first of all, she had a name and she had a history. She was Mara, and long before the breath of death's angel turned her to bitter dust, she had slipped from her mother's womb with remarkable ease, had moved in due time from infancy to womanhood with a manner of grace that came to be the sole blessing of her aging parents. She was beloved. And like most daughters who are beloved by both a father and a mother, Mara moved about her city with unflinching compassion, tending to the dispossessed as if they were her own. And they became her own. In a city given to all species of excess, there were a great many in agony. Abandoned men, abandoned women, abandoned children. Upon these she poured out her substance and her care. Her first taste of despair was at the directive of the messengers who announced without apparent sentiment what was to come and what was to be done. With surprising banality, they stood and spoke. One coughed dryly into his fist and would not meet her eye. And one took a sip from the cup she offered before he handed it back, and the two disappeared into the night. Unlike her husband, coward and sycophant, the woman remained faithful unto death. For even as the man fled the horrors of the city's conflagration, outrunning Mara and both their girls, as they all rushed into the desert, the woman stopped. She looked ahead briefly to the flat expanse, seeing her tall daughters whose strong legs and churning arms were taking them safely to the hills. She saw farther ahead the old man whom she had served and comforted for 20 years. In the impossible interval where she stood, Mara saw that she could not turn her back on even one doomed child of the city, but must turn her back instead upon the saved. Amen. Okay.
Do one more.
Can I do one
of
more?
course.
Okay, this one's mine. This one I actually, it's in my book, but I think I know it.
Do you want the book?
Oh, it would be, thanks. I love, okay, so this comes from the Christian scriptures, and there's a story about the loaves and fish, and this is where I love the apostles' doofuses that they were. Oh, it's a miracle anything ever happened. And the people have been following Jesus. They're out in the desert, and Peter goes up to Jesus and says, "Oh, send them back to town. They're getting hungry. They're going to get grumpy. This isn't good. Please send them back to town." And Jesus looks at him and said, "Feed them yourselves." Uh-oh. And Peter says, "Well, all we got are a couple of day-old loaves of bread and some stinky fish. What's that among so many?" Jesus sighed. You can just imagine. Oh, glory. And he has the crowd sit down in groups of 50, ever the community organizer that he was. And then says, the story goes that he blesses the bread and the fish and breaks it. And Matthew's gospel says 5,000 men were fed, to say nothing of the women and children. Well, now I have to tell you, that made me mad. Nothing of the women and children? What are we, chopped liver? So in my very odd prayer life, I prayed about this. Well, what finally came to me was Matthew only counted the ones who thought it was a miracle. The women knew they brought snacks from home, and the real thing was sharing. Right? Because what woman's going to leave home for the day with the family and not bring food? I mean, really. So anyway, so now that you know the story, this is my poem about loaves and fish, and it's my prayer for us. I always joked that the miracle of loaves and fish was sharing. The women always knew this. But in this moment of need and notoriety, I ache, tremble, almost weep at folks so hungry, malnourished, faced with spiritual famine of epic proportions. My heart aches with their need. Apostle-like I whine. What are we among so many? The consistent 2,000-year-old ever-new response is this: blessed and broken, you are enough. I savor the blessed, cower at the broken, and pray to be enough. Thank you very much.
That was a beautiful, beautiful gift to us. Don't put on your jacket and leave yet, because I'm going to give you one moment to reflect back. So, Sister Simone has a daily reflection practice, and there are 3 questions. And I'm going to say them, and then I'm just invite you to close your eyes for a moment and see how you would answer them for yourself. And I will not make you tell them to everybody or on TV. So what am I called to, or where am I being led? And what would a willing heart do in response to that call? So if you can just close your eyes and think, what are you being called to or led to? What could your willing heart do? Sister Simone, thank you for teaching us tonight and every day. Thank you to the Russell Berry Foundation. Thank you, Burp. And really thank you to every single one of you, because it would really not honor Sister Simone to think that you only have to thank the foundations. Every single person here who was in the room and also joining us online actually made this program and discussion possible. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
I want to say that at a time that there is very little faith in the land, you show us how to pray. And at a time that we do not feel hope, you give us hope.
Oh, good.
And at a time that there is a dire lack of leadership, you lead us. Thank you, Sister Simone Campbell.